I am honored to present Mr. Joseph C. Phillips.
Oh, wow. That's very nice. Thank you very much. If any of you are like my good friend John here, you are probably looking at the photo in the bio, looking back at me, looking at the photo there, looking back at me. You better check my ID, make sure I'm the guy in the picture. John and I have known each other a handful of years, and as he said, we talk on the radio, by phone every month. We're in contact through email, and he didn't recognize me when he saw me yesterday. First thing he said is, "What's with the hair?" I said, "Well, John, I can't afford a sports car, and I'm too scared to ride a motorcycle, so I got to do something." But it is really wonderful to be here, and I've enjoyed all of the speakers, and I'm humbled to be on the dais and following so many great minds and so many great words. Just by show of hands, I would like to know how many people in here could identify John Locke. A picture of John Locke. Do you know what he looks like? If I had a photo array of famous people from world history, could you pick him out? I'm not talking about just kind of through process of elimination. Well, I know it's not him, so it must be this guy. Would you know who he is? How many hands? Not very many. Well, the reason I ask is because my sons were mentioned. My wife and I went to a parent night at my oldest boy's school. I have 3 boys. My wife and I tell everyone that we welcomed the first one, we planned the second one, and we loved the third one anyway. So my oldest boy, Connor, we're at a parent night at his middle school. He's entering 8th grade. He's finishing 7th grade. And we walk into his English classroom, and I notice that all across the room, on every wall in the classroom, the walls are covered with posters of Karl Marx, Joseph Stalin, Lenin over there, and there are reports on all of the posters, and lots of little pithy sayings from Karl Marx, witticisms that my son had come home and repeated. "Dad, isn't this funny?" I said, "Well, this is very interesting. I should have been up at this school months ago." And so I did a little more research, and I discovered that the teacher in the English class, they had been reading Animal Farm, George Orwell's novel. And so as part of the lesson, the students had been assigned to do research on Marx and Lenin and Stalin, and they had to write these reports, and all these posters were up all over the wall. So on the way out of the classroom, I took my son to the side and I said, "On Monday, tell your teacher your father wants to know when you're going to start teaching John Locke." And my son, bless his heart, said to me, "Who's John Locke?" And then my beautiful, wonderful wife looked at me and she said, "Who's John Locke?" Now listen, my son goes to he's in a magnet program, highly gifted magnet program. So he's in school with a lot of really bright kids. He comes home from school and talks to me about these conversations that he's been having with his friends. They've been discussing politics and religion and philosophy, in addition to telling fart jokes. But they've been getting all of this stuff in. I can't imagine being in 7th grade talking about these things. These are very smart kids. And not one of them, I'm in a betting mood. I'm betting that not one of them could identify John Locke. And I'll tell you something else. I live in Los Angeles. I'll let it all ride that less than 1% of the students in Los Angeles Unified School District could identify John Locke. And because I'm winning, double or nothing, that none of these bright kids would be able to tell you why he's important. And all of them, or at least a higher percentage, could tell you who Karl Marx was. Now, don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I'm not anti-Animal Farm. I'm not anti-George Orwell. I happen to think Animal Farm is a beautiful book, wonderful piece of literature, and I support it being part of the literary curriculum at the school. But just so we're clear, Animal Farm is an allegory about the terror of Stalinist Russia. Animal Farm is not anti-Marxist. In fact, really, Animal Farm talks about how the ignorance, corruption, laziness of the Russian people derailed the Marxist utopia. And it's also kind of a cynical view that the end of all government is totalitarianism. Really? Is that it? Is that all that's wrong with Stalinism? Is nothing else wrong with Marx? Is the end of all government totalitarianism? Are people not able to govern themselves, as Madison said, according to the 10 Commandments of God? Are our children really able, are we really able to have this conversation about Marx, the ideas, the Soviet Union, China, versus those American ideals, without the foundation being laid of John Locke? I was very disturbed, very disturbed that these kids cannot tell you the source of the principles upon which their nation was founded, but can talk to you. Each of us can talk to us about men whose values and principles are in direct contradiction of those principles. Who is more important to the American identity, Karl Marx or John Locke? Why aren't there posters of John Locke in the room? Well, some of it, quite frankly, is our fault. Because our public schools have been struggling, and we have been demanding that they raise the level of education for math and English. And at the same time, they've decreased the amount of civic education. I didn't know this until recently, but to get into a public university in California, you only need 2 years of government or history. You need 4 years of English and math. And I'm not saying we need less English and math. I'm saying we need more civics education. And if you don't believe that an education in civics, oh, now, you're going to get me started. I'm an actor. I love applause, so I might stay up here till Dennis shows up. But if you don't believe that that civics is important. It's as important as geometry, calculus, these things. Let me paint an illustration for you. I sit on the board of the California African American Museum. It's a state museum. So every month at these board meetings, I'm really thrust into the middle of what it means to be caught up in the bureaucracy, and a bureaucracy in California, which is a whole different thing I won't get into. But last year we had an exhibit there, a wonderful exhibit of photographs taken by Howard Bingham. If you don't know who Howard Bingham is Muhammad Ali's best friend. Chronicled Ali's life and career. I happened, when I was on the Cosby Show, I met Howard. He's a wonderful man, gentle soul, beautiful photographer. In addition, in 1968, I think it was for Life magazine, Life or Look, he did a series of photographs on the Black Panther movement in Oakland, California. So the exhibit was all of these photographs of Black Panthers, everyday Black Panther life. It was wonderful. I brought friends. It was a marvelous historical, marvelous piece of history. Now, in these photographs, you saw the Black Panthers who were very much into civic education. So you saw them teaching the civics classes, rooms filled with people from the community, and each and every one of them had a little red book. The Panthers were Marxists. They were teaching Marxism. If you want to know why, at times, the Congressional Black Caucus seems nuttier than a fruitcake, it is because most of them were raised on the mother's milk of Marxism. If you want to know what happened to liberalism, classic liberalism, if you want to point to a historical moment, you can point to that, because in 68, 69, 70, they were all reading Mao. If you want to point to one reason why the door closed on the Republican Party after the exodus of Black voters, you can point to that moment. That's how important it is. That's how important it is. What goes on in our classrooms? What are we teaching? What's the foundation that we're laying? Unfortunately, when you bring this topic up, you are quite often labeled a radical. Somehow you become right-wing. You're probably admittedly a conservative. Right-wing? All Americans should be concerned about this. This is not a conservative issue. This is an American identity issue. But let me illustrate. Let me illustrate how far off we've come. And John might remember this, but years ago I was in town, my book had just come out, and I was born and raised in Denver, so there are a lot of friends who wanted to get together, and I was excited. It was an exciting period, and a dear friend of my family, going back years and years and years, I'm on the phone, and we're trying to, negotiate schedules. When can we get together? When can we meet? And I say, well, no, I can't do lunch. I'm speaking at a luncheon sponsored by the Claremont Institute. The Claremont Institute, what is that? Well, it's a think tank, and they're dedicated to restoring the founding principles to our national life. Oh, ultra right wing. It's an ultra right wing. Exactly which of those principles do you disagree with? Perhaps we should just start at the beginning, and you can tell me which ones you want to do away with. How about that? That's one of the reasons that I have kind of been playing with this idea I'd like to share with you. I've been more and more referring to myself as a conservationist. Not a conservative. Now listen, I don't have anything wrong with telling people I'm a conservative. I tell people all the time I'm a conservative. I'm not a conservative, and I tell them I'm not a conservative because I'm on the right. I'm a conservative because I am correct. But it bothers me sometimes that you always hear this mantra. You just for the status quo. Just for the status quo. You don't want to change anything. I say, well, conservatives are not against progress. Conservatives are for prudence. It's a difference. And just because we're talking about it, you know, who is it really that's against progress? I mean, anytime we start talking about doing things about immigration, immigration enforcement, as Michelle Malkin pointed out, anytime we start talking about ending generational welfare, getting rid of racial preferences, anytime we start talking about, for instance, giving people ownership of their retirement dollars, anytime we start talking about changing the way we think about public education, no, you can't do that, you can't do that. We're progressives, we don't want any change. But I'm not doing the dance that they do. But I just think that conservation really, is an accurate illustration of what we're trying to do. Conservationists don't want just one tree, they want a forest. Conservationists don't want to just see one condor, California condor, they want lots and lots of condors. Conservatives / conservationists, you know, we want to protect a natural resource. We want to husband it, make it grow, nourish it. We want to see a lot of this. So I'm playing with this idea of conservation. You know, conservatism is more than politics. It's more than this political ideology. I'm always fascinated to hear people confuse it with being a Republican. All Republicans are not conservatives. And we all know that all Republicans are not even Republicans. So, but it's a world view. It's a way of looking at things. It's an idea. So what is the seed idea of this conservationism? What is the seed that we're trying to nurture? Well, if you've seen this movie, Amazing Grace, which came out a few years ago, it's a wonderful, wonderful film. It's about the decades-long battle by William Wilberforce to end the slave trade in the British Empire. It's a wonderful movie, and it's filled with so many poignant moments, but there's one that sticks out for me. William Wilberforce is at a dinner, and he's there to meet some of the abolitionists and to talk about the cause. And one gentleman there, Oladu Ekiano, if I pronounce his name correctly, was a former slave, was an abolitionist, and was actually a best-selling author. He'd written a book about his experience in slavery. It sold 1 million copies in Great Britain. And he opens his shirt, revealing an ugly scar. It was a brand that he had received when he got off the boat in the West Indies from Africa. And he says to Wilberforce, he said, "This was the moment that I knew I no longer belonged to God, but to men." And the moment gave me goosebumps. It so perfectly illustrated to me the true evil of slavery. Not because it's cruel. Slavery would be wrong even if you only worked an 8-hour day, your slave master gave you retirement benefits and free health care. Slavery is wrong because it reduces the divine to the profane. All men belong to God. That's the seed idea. Jefferson was eloquent when he said, some men were not born with saddles on their backs and others with boots and spurs to ride them by the grace of God. All men belong to God. He was even more eloquent when he codified that idea into our keystone document. He wrote the 55 most important words in world history. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. All men belong to God. I'm not finished yet. Lincoln took it a step further. Codifying it, imprinting it on our national identity. Lincoln standing there, if you can picture it, on the freshly dug graves of thousands of American dead. And in that moment, he speaks of a nation conceived in liberty, dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. And then he calls the nation forward to a new birth of freedom, a new way of doing things dedicated to that idea that all men belong to God. 100 years later, Martin Luther King Jr., standing on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, delivers one of the greatest speeches in American history. And in that speech, he begins by reaching back to Lincoln. 50 years ago, he begins. And then he reaches back to Jefferson, demanding that this nation live up to the true meaning of her creed. All men belong to God. And then, with a rhetorical flourish that will live forever, he talks about a dream where one day men will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. All men belong to God. Sometime later, I'm not finished, sometime later, it was given even further moral weight by none other than Ronald Reagan, standing in front of that monument to totalitarianism, that shrine to the failure of the Marxist utopia. And truly speaking truth to power, Reagan says, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. All men belong to God. And it was none other than George W. Bush. He of the misspoken words, few words, all of them misspoken. Yes, that George W. Bush, who said, liberty is not America's gift to the world. It is God's gift to humanity. All men belong to God. Divine ownership. That's the seed. That's the foundation. That is the bedrock. That's the germ, the seed that we want to plant, that we want to nurture and nourish. We want it to spread throughout all of our children, our children's children, our neighbors, the guy that runs the market down the street. That's the seed. How do we do it? Well, we can start by taking down pictures of Karl Marx in our English classrooms and putting up photographs of John Locke so that all of us know what he looks like. And if you want to study a little book, I've got a little book for you. It's called the United States Constitution. And it should be attached to the Declaration of Independence. Lincoln said that the Declaration was a golden apple, the Constitution a silver frame around it. The point, as beautiful as it is not that silver frame. The point, the object, is that beautiful golden apple that the frame surrounds. The source, what informs the Constitution. We can start there. It's one place to start. Now, I've talked about my first son, my first man-child, Connor. I want to tell you a little bit about my second son, Ellis. 10 years old, Ellis fancies himself a great athlete. He's pretty good, but never as good as in the 10-year-old mind. But I'm also, as a father, I'm coaching Little League football, and I bought for Ellis an Under Armour jersey. If you've seen those commercials, the Under Armour is the skin-tight jersey that all the guys wear, and it just shows off the muscles, you know, boom. But when you're 10 years old, you know, it's just kind of like hangs on your skinny, bony body. But, you know, he had wanted it, so I bought him the Under Armour, and he put it on. He put his pads on and put his jersey on, number 32. And we're the Calabasas Raiders for Marcus Allen, number 32. And he put on his receiver gloves and his little wristbands, and he started going through the house, and he was singing, "I'm bringing sexy back." He gets that from his mother's side of the family. So I'm looking at him. I say, "Son, sit down. Let me talk to you for a second. Let me tell you a story that a friend of mine likes to tell. When he's out on the speaking circuit, he tells this story all the time. He swears it's true. He was raised in the Midwest, went to a Catholic school in the 50s, early 60s. And he became friends with many of the priests, teachers there at the school. He came back from college and got together with one of his old friends, one of the priests from the school, and they went to watch the boxing matches. And he took along one of his Jewish buddies. Before one of the fighter is getting into the ring, before he climbs in the ropes, he blesses himself. And the Jewish friend says, "Father, what does that mean?" And the priest said, "Not a thing if he can't fight." So I said to Ellis, I said, "You want to know what sexy is?" Ellis is a middle linebacker. I said, "Sexy is if you lead our team in tackles. That's sexy. How about if you sack the quarterback a couple times today? That's sexy. How about you cause some fumbles, recover a fumble? That's sexy. You got to do more than pose." You know? And for us conservatives / conservationists, we've got to do more than just adopt the profile. It's not enough just to quote the founders. You know, as our president is finding out, you know, people want more than fancy speeches. A fancy speech is not a substitute for action. It won't replace leadership. So we can't just pose as conservationists. We can't just talk about faith. We've got to live faith. We can't just talk about family. We've got to live family. We can't talk about charity. We've got to live charity. We can't just talk about limited government. We've got to live limited government. And that's directed at those in the audience who are still running for office. The great rock band Who says, they asked the question, will we be fooled again? I don't want to be fooled again. Don't talk the talk if you're not prepared to walk the walk. Equiano was correct. We all belong to God. That's the seed idea. And ideas have immense power. It's that idea that ended slavery in the Americas. It's that idea that defeated Nazism. It's that idea that defeated the Soviet Union. I'm here to tell you that that idea is as valuable as any of our natural resources. In fact, I'll do you one better. That idea is our most precious natural resource. Thank you very much.